Paddington Bear Blue. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. This is Climate Countdown. I'm Amy Goodman. At the heart of the Obama administration's effort to reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions is a market-based system to trade carbon, known as a cap and trade. The system sets carbon emissions limits of companies and doles out allowances that can be bought and sold to meet the emission targets. In Washington, the House approved a cap and trade system earlier this year as part of the Waxman-Markey bill. The Senate's considering adopting a similar provision in the Boxer-Kerry bill. But the issue of cap and trade has split the environmental and progressive movements. Last week, in the pages of the New York Times, NASA scientist James Hansen published a piece called Cap and Fade. He argued carbon trading will do little to slow global warming or reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Hansen went on to say cap and trade will allow polluters and Wall Street traders to fleece the public out of billions of dollars. Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman responded by describing cap and trade as the only form of action we have to take against greenhouse gas emissions before catastrophe becomes inevitable. In a moment, we'll host a debate on the subject, but first I want to turn to a new animated film that premiered here in Copenhagen, or at least it was played here. It's called The Story of Cap and Trade. It's directed by Annie Leonard, who's best known for her web video, The Story of Stuff.
So how does cap and trade work? Well, pretty much all serious scientists agree that we need to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere to 350 parts per million if we want to avoid climate disaster. In the U.S., that means reducing our emissions by 80%, maybe even more, by 2050. 80%! Now, the problem is that most of our global economy runs on burning fossil fuels, which releases carbon. The factories that make all our stuff, the ships and trucks that carry it around the world, our cars and buildings and appliances, and just about everything. So how are we going to reduce carbon 80% and not go back to living like Little House on the Prairie? Well, these cap and trade guys are saying that a new carbon stock market is the best way to get it done. The first step would be getting governments around the world to agree on a yearly limit on carbon emissions. That's the cap. I think that part is great. So how do they want to ensure that carbon emissions stay under the cap? Well, governments would distribute a certain amount of permits to pollute. Every year there would be fewer and fewer permits as we follow the cap to our goal. Innovative companies will get on board, building clean alternatives and getting more efficient. As permits get scarcer, they would also become more valuable. So naturally, companies who have extra will want to sell them to companies who need them. That's where the trading comes in. The logic is that as long as we stay under the cap, it doesn't matter who pollutes and who innovates. We'll meet our climate deadline, avoiding catastrophe, and oh yeah, these guys take their fee as they broker this multi-trillion-dollar carbon market. Save the planet, get rich, what's not to like? Some of my friends who really care about our future support cap and trade. A lot of environmental groups that I respect do too. They know it's not a perfect solution and they don't love the idea of turning our planet's future over to these guys, but they think it's an important first step and that it's better than nothing. I'm not so sure. And I'm not the only one.
An excerpt from the online short, The Story of Cap and Trade by Annie Leonard. We'll link to the full video on our website. We're joined now by two guests. Larry Lohmann is the author of the book Carbon Trading, a critical conversation on climate change, privatization, and power. He works at the British non-governmental organization, NGO, called The Corner House. We're also joined by Frank Ackerman. He's an economist at the Stockholm Environment Institute. He's part of Tufts University, author of Can We Afford the Future? Economics for a Warming World. The story of cap and trade that Annie Leonard did is very critical of cap and trade. Professor Leonard, you are for cap and trade, or Professor Ackerman, you're for cap and trade. Explain why, and do it in basic terms. You're used to teaching students. Think of us as all your students.
I'm not exactly for it. I don't think either Hansen or Krugman got it right. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly not the only thing that we need. There's undoubtedly a role for having a price on carbon, which can be done either through a tax or through cap and trade. The big mistake in this debate, I think, is to pretend that a price on carbon is all that we need. Anytime a price incentive like this has worked, it has needed many, many other things to be working with it. The image of a level playing field that economists sometimes suggest is exactly wrong. We need to be doing everything we can to tilt the playing field in the direction we want it to go. Then a price, either through cap and trade or through a tax, might actually make it a little easier, but no chance at all. It'll do the job alone.
Larry Lohmann, you're opposed to cap and trade, so you feel strongly about this. Why?
For some of the same reasons, actually, that Frank was referring to. I agree completely with Frank that there's no magic bullet in terms of a carbon price which is going to solve the climate problem. What we need is massive reinvestment away from fossil fuels, putting subsidies, instead of putting subsidies into fossil fuels, putting them into renewable energy. We need to overcome our addiction to fossil fuels in industrialized societies. And the problem with cap and trade is that it stands in the way of doing that in many ways. It's a way of providing pollution rights to some of the worst polluters so that they can delay the kind of structural change that's necessary.
Explain how that works.
Well, it happens in a number of ways. First of all, the cap and trade proper is a system by which those who are unable or do not want to reinvest in the long term away from fossil fuels, I'm talking about big industries like electricity generators, highly dependent on fossil fuels, chemical, steel, cement, and so forth. Instead of investing in structural change away from their dependence on fossil fuels, they can simply buy pollution credits or pollution rights from other sources. Now, there are two sources of pollution rights they can buy to keep doing business as usual. One of those sources is to buy pollution rights from other companies in the same country who have reduced their emissions beyond the requirements, and they have extra pollution rights to sell. Another and very dangerous source of pollution rights that they can buy in order to continue business as usual is from so-called carbon offset projects instituted abroad. For example, you might invest in a tree plantation which supposedly absorbs your pollution abroad, and that enables you to continue business as usual. The problem with this is that it enables industrialized countries to continue their addiction to fossil fuels.
I wanted to go to this issue of carbon offsets and then get Frank Ackerman's response and play another clip from Annie Leonards' online video called The Story of Cap and Trade.
Devil number 2 is called offsetting. Offset permits are created when a company supposedly removes or reduces carbon. They then get a permit which can be sold to a polluter who wants permission to emit more carbon. In theory, one activity offsets the other. The danger with offsets is it's very hard to guarantee that real carbon is being removed to create the permit, yet these permits are worth real money. This creates a very dangerous incentive to create false offsets, to cheat. Now, in some cases, cheating isn't the end of the world, but in this case, it is. And already there's a lot of cheating going on. Like in Indonesia, Sinar Mas Corporation cut down indigenous forests, causing major ecological and cultural destruction. Then they took the wasteland they created and planted palm oil trees. Guess what they can get for it? Yep, offset permits. Carbon out? No. Carbon in? You bet. Companies can even earn offsets for not doing anything at all. Like operators of a polluting factory can claim they were planning to expand 200%, but reduce the plans to expand only 100%. For that meaningless claim, they get offset permits. Permits that they can sell to someone else to make more pollution. That is so stupid. The list of scams go on, and many of the worst ones happen in the so-called third world, where big business does whatever it wants to whomever it wants. And with lax standards and regulations on offsets, they can get permits for just about anything.